So today was supposed to be simple. One of those I'll just set up the project foundation real quick kind of days that every game developer says right before accidentally spending several hours arguing with Windows, with the computer, with NPM, terminal processes, what else? Hidden environment variables, mysterious permissions, and at least three other different forms of digital nonsense that absolutely should not exist in civilized society. I wasn't even building gameplay yet. No machines, no customers, no economy systems, no progression, no uh, game balance, nothing. I was literally just trying to create the foundation of the game. That's it. Just the clean starting point. The digital equivalent of putting down the concrete floor before building the game on top of it. And somehow, even that turned into a mini boss fight. Honestly, this is one of those moments that perfectly captures indie game development. People imagine game dev as this magical creative process where you sit down inspired, type furiously for a few hours, and suddenly, poof, there's a beautiful game on the screen. It doesn't work like that, actually. In reality, sometimes your entire day becomes, why is NPM angry? Why is PowerShell acting weird? Why is Windows this and Windows that? Why is Vite very weird today? Why does literally every tool I touch suddenly develop emotional problems? Well, anyway, I started by creating the project using Vite with React and TypeScript because I wanted a clean, modern setup without stuffing the project full of unnecessary garbage on day one. I've learned the hard way that if you start a project by immediately installing 50 libraries because some YouTube tutorial said they were essential, you eventually wake up 3 months later wondering why your game's foundation feel like a haunted house built on a wet cardboard. So I kept things minimal. No tailwind, no extra frameworks, no giant architecture experiments, no quote unquote future proofing nonsense. Just a clean React and a TypeScript foundation. Simple. Or at least it was supposed to be simple. So the first problem appeared immediately when NPM basically looked at me and said, fucking no. So it turns out the environment was running in cache only mode, meaning it couldn't fetch the packages it actually needed from the internet. So the project creation failed instantly because Create Vite wasn't available locally, which is honestly such a funny way for a project to begin. So imagine trying to build a game and the universe stops you because somebody forgot to unlock the supply closet. So I reran the command with proper network access and finally got the Vite downloaded correctly. So success for approximately 12 seconds. Then npm install exploded for basically the exact same reason. So this time it complained about dependencies like, some random @slint /js not being available because, once again, the environment was refusing to fetch packages normally. So at this point, I could already feel that this should have taken 5 minutes energy entering the room. So I reran the install with approval enabled. And finally, everything installed correctly. Zero vulnerabilities, dependencies complete, node modules successfully created. Beautiful. Tiny victory. One of those deeply pathetic developer victories where you stare at the terminal like, yes, the folders exist, my empire begins. So then I checked the generated project structure just to make sure everything actually scaffolded correctly. And thankfully, it did. Public folder, SRC folders there, app.tsx is there, main.tsx, TypeScript configs, slint config, everything where it should be. Although there was one funny little moment where the expected checklist mentioned vite.config.json, except Vite actually creates vite.config.ts instead because it's TypeScript based, which immediately triggered that classic developer instinct of, wait, did something go wrong? Before realizing, no, this is actually correct. So game development is honestly just professionally overreacting to file names half the time. Then came the dev server. Oh boy. This is where the real nonsense started. So I tried launching the project normally, and immediately PowerShell decided to have some kind of existential crisis involving path versus path environment variables. Not even joking. The launcher itself tripped over Windows casing issues. Not gameplay bugs, not rendering bugs, not, code bugs. Capital letters. Absolutely incredible technology we've built as a species. So, I bypassed NPM's wrapper and tried launching things more directly. That failed too. Then I tried using Node's process launcher manually to spawn the Vite server in the background. That also failed. So at this point, the setup process had evolved from starting a React app into what felt like performing forbidden rituals inside an abandoned IT department. Eventually, I went one level deeper and launched Vite directly through its installed binary just to avoid all the wrapper nonsense entirely, which honestly felt a little like hot wiring a car. And somehow, that actually worked. Kinda. So the server launched in the background, but then I had to verify whether it was actually running or whether the terminal was simply lying to me with confidence, because terminals do that a lot. The first launch produced no reachable server and no usable logs, which is always a deeply reassuring moment. So I ran Vite into the foreground instead, just to observe it directly, like some kind of unstable laboratory experiment. That's when another issue appeared. This time, Vite itself hit a Windows Sandbox permission error while trying to resolve config paths. At this point, I genuinely started laughing because the project wasn't even fighting me anymore. The operating system was fighting me personally. So I reran the dev server with elevated approval, and finally, the server stayed alive. Then came the funniest part. Vite reported that port 5173 was already occupied from one of the earlier failed launch attempts that apparently did partially work somehow despite acting broken the entire time. So the new instance launched itself on port 5174 instead, meaning I somehow accidentally created two separate Vite server situations while trying to solve one, which honestly feels extremely on brand for game development. And then finally, I checked both local URLs and confirmed they were both returning HTTP 200 successfully, meaning the app was officially alive. The clean React plus TypeScript foundation for the game was finally running correctly. No gameplay yet, no mechanics yet, no nothing, just the foundation. But honestly, these early project setup moments matter way more than people realize. This is the phase where a game still feels fragile and theoretical. Nothing exists except potential. You're basically standing inside an empty warehouse, imagining what the final place could become someday. And weirdly enough, I love this space. There's something exciting about seeing that first clean dev server launch successfully, even if it's just the default Vite screen sitting there doing absolutely nothing useful. Because that little empty app is basically the first heartbeat of the entire game. Everything comes after this. Every machine, every feature, every horrible balancing problem, every UI redesign, every late night why did I build this system like this regrets, every breakthrough, every moment where the game suddenly becomes real. It all starts here with one terminal window, with one functioning localhost page, and several hours of suffering that absolutely could have been avoided if computers were emotionally stable.